everyone feeling? Sort of the closing era of the GraphQL Summit 2025. I hope everyone still has a little bit of energy left. Well done for making it to one of our last talks. We got some exciting things to cover today, and hopefully you guys take a few of these ideas away and take them back with you and try them out and get to play a little bit more. So I'm Tim. You might notice my accent is a little bit weird. I'm originally from New Jersey, but I've been living in Australia for the last 10 years. So g'day to anyone from down under, if we have anyone, down under. And shout out to all my people from exit 153A off the Garden State Parkway. New Jersey joke. Coincidentally, 10 years is about as long as I've been with Apollo. So there's a good chance we've met before. I see some familiar faces in the crowd. If you came to Summit last year, I gave a workshop on using Insights in Studio. You might have encountered me in a customer interview at some point. Done a lot of product work here as well as lots and lots of engineering. So I love getting to meet folks like everyone here. And I've been around long enough to answer a lot of questions relating to Apollo. So I'll be, after this talk, up at the Experts Lounge and Meet the Experts Land. So if there's anything that we don't get covered here, feel free to come and find me. All right. So today's agenda. We're going to talk a lot about service ownership at scale, which is a message that underpins a lot of what we do here at Apollo. And when we talk about services with GraphQL, we're really talking about how subgraphs come together to form a unified API layer. And while this is going to be a fairly technical talk for folks who want to dive deeper into federation, this talk is really about the people who are building and operating these services and making their lives better. We have some really exciting new features to talk about. First, we're going to have a look at the latest advancements around subgraph permissions and keys. And then we're going to turn to some new Insights capabilities, specifically designed for service owners. And finally, we'll wrap up with a preview of some of the things we'll be working on next, which are aimed at the same goal of enabling ownership at scale. So some common wisdom. Subgraphs map to domains. Chances are, if your organization has at least 2 subgraphs, you've started to wrestle with domain boundaries. You've seen the value in being able to divide and conquer. So raise your hand if you've ever been part of a project to decompose a monolith, or you've seen services multiply as you've scaled up. Lots of hands, OK? And I think a huge part of why Apollo is here is exactly this, to enable us to build things in parallel. And carving out domains of functionality makes it possible for us to share the work. And what we see in practice is that subgraph services are really owned by teams. And teams who need to work together to build APIs, but who also need the freedom to move quickly. And we see this organizational structure play out in the way that teams use federation. This is what makes GraphQL plus federation an absolute game changer. It just unlocks massive parallelization for engineering teams. And I don't mean to claim that this is something we invented with federation. In fact, it's the opposite. Well before we even built federation, our customers were struggling to make the API layer scale. And it turns out this is a really common thread, actually, across the entire software industry. You might have heard of a notion called Conway's Law, which dates all the way back to the dark ages of computer science, 1967. It states that the systems we build tend to mirror our communication structures. I have a quote here from Martin Fowler, which I think illustrates this beautifully. The first step in dealing with Conway's Law is know not to fight it. I still remember one sharp technical leader who has just made the architect of a large new project that consisted of 6 teams in different cities all over the world. I made my first architectural decision, he told me. There are going to be 6 major subsystems. I have no idea what they're going to be, but there are going to be 6 of them. So yeah, this Martin Fowler quote represents a trend that we see. And it's no surprise that federation has become such an important solution to scaling up our APIs. Now, if we dig a little deeper, maybe we can think about why this pattern emerges. From my perspective, this is a story that's a lot about ownership. And because it allows for this kind of loose coupling between teams, federation unlocks the superpowers of ownership. What kind of superpowers? Autonomy, the ability to make decisions quickly, act on the latest data and feedback, deploying your changes independently. Focus. We all know that cognitive overload is something that we're experiencing a lot as engineers these days, lots to keep up with, lots of technologies changing all the time. At least carving out a domain that gives us a little bit of time to become experts in our area. Any chance we get to focus will just help us be that much more productive. And security, bounded contexts, separate data sets, separate access controls. Scalability is a big one. We can build these massively parallel organizations and get just better results. And one way to say this is that ownership drives impact. Ultimately, this is about getting things done. We see time and again how unlocking better ownership models can directly impact the bottom line. So speaking of unlocking things, we've made it to the first feature announcement, which is subgraph permissions and keys. To frame the problem we're trying to solve with subgraph keys, let's review the principle of least privilege. And this feature follows from a cybersecurity recommendation called the principle of least privilege, which states that permissions should be scoped as minimally as possible in order to prevent misuse and abuse. As it pertains to teams using federation, we've heard that there's a need to limit the blast radius of schema changes. To ensure that each team's schema is isolated in the deployment pipeline. So in the worst case, some of the things that could go wrong here, maybe you've experienced some of them, modifying your federation dependencies, removing fields or arguments that could potentially break core functionality, changing connector endpoints, things that, if they were to happen unintentionally, could be really bad. And if that happens, we also might need to roll back changes, which can come with its own set of challenges. So subgraph keys to the rescue. These keys are specifically designed for use with deployment pipelines. And the big selling point is that they can be scoped to specific subgraphs, which helps teams enforce their ownership at scale. It provides ways to additionally delegate trust for platform owners. They're designed to be compatible with CI/CD platforms. We'll walk through how this works in a minute, but note that we stepped up the encryption on these keys as well, so we can feel more comfortable than ever sharing them with our third parties, CI/CD vendors like GitHub Actions, CircleCI, Jenkins, anything that allows you to securely share your secrets. And the keys are enterprise grade. They come with default expirations, stronger 256-bit secrets, which reduce the risk of data breaches. And they're designed for compliance with enterprise best practices like key rotation. Let's have a look at some of these workflows using subgraph keys in practice. To make subgraph keys more secure, we're also introducing a new Apollo key format. You'll see that we have a few parts to these new keys. So they start with an AK_ prefix for Apollo key, followed by a version number that allows us to make them backwards compatible. Then there's an opaque key ID, which in times past might have revealed internal resources, which is not the case anymore. We can still use that for efficient lookups if we have to. And finally, a secret, which is a 256-bit value, encoded here as base 64. And the security team tells me this is secure enough to resist brute force attacks, at least until they figure out quantum security breaches. Let's hope that doesn't happen anytime soon. Let's look at some of these keys in practical workflows. First, we're going to set up a subgraph deployment to manage schema changes. So this is an example from our documentation about how to set up one of these keys. We're actually going to use a rover command to generate one. And in a minute, we'll actually walk through how this works step by step. But we now have the option of creating a key that's specific to a given subgraph and graph variant. For example, you can target just dev, staging, or all three production environments. Alternatively, a key can have permissions to any combination of subgraphs and variants. And let's have a look now at how to use the Rover API key create command along with a configuration file. So I've pre-recorded my demo here. But so yeah, we're going to start with creating a YAML file. And at the top of the YAML file, we just need to have our graph ID, which in this case, e-commerce GTM demo. And then after that, we can include the variant. Could be more than one variant, like I said. In this case, we'll just use production. And underneath that, we're going to list the subgraphs that this key has the permissions to operate on. Products and reviews in this case. So yeah, once we save this file, we're going to actually pass it on the command line to rover API key create using standard in with cat. So rover API key create is the command. And then we have to include our organization ID, which is your Apollo organization ID. And one more thing, which is the key type. We'll talk about that a little bit more. In this case, it's subgraph. And a friendly name, which you can use to refer to this key later. So you run that command, and you get back a response in your terminal. And one important thing to remember is that once this key is generated, it's going to show it to you here. Well, that'll be the last time you see it. Don't worry. That's not a real key anymore. Oh, can we go back one? Yeah, so make sure to copy that API key into a safe place when you're going through this workflow, so you won't be able to see it again. And yeah, don't do what I've done here and put it on a slide in front of the whole world. And now that we've generated a subgraph key, it can be provided to your CI/CD tool of choice. So in the case of GitHub Actions, you would visit the settings for your repository and create a new repository secret, and store the value of that API key as a secret in GitHub. And now we can build a GitHub Actions workflow using the YAML file here, which is an example where on every push to the main branch for our subgraph, it'll load the subgraph key from the environment variable and use that in a similar way, pass it to rover on the command line when we publish our schema changes. Now we can look at some other things we can do with these keys. So admins can use rover to list all of the API keys in your organizations. So rover API key list is a way to do that. You'll see something similar. However, like I said before, that API secret won't be available. Again, we'll pass the organization ID on the command line, and you'll be able to see the key IDs and names. Rotating an API key. So we currently have support for manual key rotation via rover or via the platform API. So when you need to swap out a key, you can create a new key and then use the delete command to remove the old one. Rover API key delete, we just pass the organization ID and the ID of the key that we'd like to delete. And as the warning label suggests, make sure you have the correct key when you delete it, since this is a permanent deletion. It's also recommended when you're doing rotations to set up any new keys before removing the old ones so you don't break anything. Renaming keys. So here's one more thing that can be helpful for keeping keys organized. I mentioned that friendly name before. You can use the rename command to change the friendly name for a key. This works similarly to the delete command, where you just pass the organization ID and the ID of the key along with a new name. And who can use subgraph keys? This landed in Rover 1.36 and higher. There's also a platform API as well if you need to build your own tooling around this. There are some constraints based on your GraphOS plan. You have to be the standard enterprise level to get subgraph keys. Graph API keys are the thing we've always had, and you'll still have those on the free plan and developer plan. Some FAQs. Do subgraph keys expire? By default, they expire after 1 year. We're hoping to add the ability to configure this in the very near future, so look out for that. And who can see what keys exist? Org admins and graph admins can use that list command. Or again, like I said, that's also supported in the platform API. Anyone who tries to access this set of keys that's not an admin will get a 403 style permissions error. And you also need to have an admin's help to get you to rotate or modify a key. And can you use subgraph API keys with protected variants? Some of you might be using protected variants, which is a feature of being able to lock down a specific variant to have stricter permissions. A subgraph API key can publish to a protected variant if it's scoped to that variant. Can a user change a subgraph key's scope? Nope. That configuration file that we made earlier essentially defines the key from when it's created to when it's deleted. So you'll have to generate a new key if the subgraph name changes or if you publish to a new variant. And can customers change a key's expiration? Like I said, not currently, but we're hoping to do that soon. Until then, we suggest you just set up a new API key, rotate, delete the old one. The road ahead. one of the first things we'll be working on is UI support in Studio for managing keys. We've seen Rover, we've talked about the platform API, but it would be really nice if we can just go to Studio and tweak things. Alongside of that, we'll be making it easier to rotate keys, including the ability to set the custom expiration times. And further into the future, we expect to see a lot more types of keys. So based off of this new Apollo key format, if anyone's been to the Kubernetes operator talks this week, there's a similar Kubernetes operator key which has the same format using this new style. And so we're going to be building a few more of those, things like router keys, maybe variant keys. Ultimately, we'd like you to be able to configure them to a much finer degree of granularity, right? So things we're used to, like role-based access control, read-write controls, and more specific feature-level controls. So if you have ideas about what you'd like to see here, definitely get in touch with our customer support team or your sales team, and make sure that that feedback makes its way in. All right. Might have a little drink. Now that we've talked about safer deployments, we're going to talk about what happens once you've got your subgraph live in production. So Subgraph Insights is a new feature we're announcing this week at Summit, which provides much needed visibility into how federation is actually working under the hood. To set the stage, let's go over a quick refresh about how federation works at runtime. So even if we're federating dozens of subgraphs, our goal is still to expose a single unified API to client apps. And when an operation comes into the router, we have to determine which services need to be involved in resolving that request. And one of the first things that happens is a query plan is generated. And for requests that span multiple subgraphs, the query plan determines which data will be fetched from each subgraph service and in what order. In this example, we have an operation that needs to fetch a list of hotels from the hotel service, along with a list of reviews for that hotel, which will be resolved from a separate review service. And to illustrate this further, the original query is actually separated into different subqueries, one of which will hit the hotel service, and the other will be sent to reviews. And to use federation lingo, we call these fetches, a term that we'll see again in a minute. And historically, the insights in Studio have been focused on the inbound traffic coming in from clients, which is really great for understanding the traffic patterns of mobile apps and websites that are making API calls. An Apollo history quiz. Which came first, Apollo Insights or Apollo Federation? If you want to say Apollo Federation, raise your hand. If you want to say Apollo Insights. Well, the insights have it. So for any really long-time Apollo users in the room, well done for having a good memory. Insights was actually our very first commercial feature offering for GraphQL. But if you used Studio before, you'll know that we keep track of things like operation metrics, field metrics, error stats, and client metadata. This is all really useful stuff. However, with federation, increasingly the way that most of our customers are building their graphs, this leaves out a crucial piece of the puzzle, which is this blurry blob on the right. For anyone trying to better understand graph health, the story of what's happening behind the scenes at the subgraph level behind the router has been missing until now. So with Subgraph Insights, we've added another layer of observability to Studio, which provides this window into what's happening at the API layer behind the router. And again, this is about empowering teams to own their domains. We really wanted to enable these workflows where a team could come to Studio and find out how their services were doing. So we're super excited to show this off, and I think it will be a big win for ownership at scale. Now we can jump to the demo. I'm actually going to run through a Studio demo of Subgraph Insights. Cool. All right, so to get to Subgraph Insights, we're first going to navigate to the Insights tab on the left. And then from the drop-down menu, we'll just choose the new option called Subgraphs. And on the left-hand side, we can now see the most active subgraphs and connectors receiving requests from the router. By default, the list is ranked by the number of fetches, which count the number of times a router makes a request to fetch data from that service. In the case of a GraphQL subgraph, A fetch is a GraphQL request. Or in the case of a connector, it's an HTTP request that's hitting a REST API. So to better understand service health, we can also sort the list by a few different options here. We've got error percentage, P50, P90, P95 service time. All right. So we've also added a tool to identify top traffic sources. These help to get you a sense of where traffic is originating when it hits your subgraph. These are the top 5 operations that are hitting your subgraph, ranked by request rate, error percentage, and the slowest P95 latency. You can also view this by client. And this helps you get a sense of what clients are causing the most requests or errors on this particular service. And further down the page, we can see our usual health metrics, which are error trends over time, fetches over time, performance over time. And we can toggle to see additional error metrics here, error percentage as well, if you're trying to find anomalies or spikes in the system. The latency view also has a few options. This is what we call the heat map view, which shows a latency distribution over time. That gives you a sense of overall latency trends at a glance. And you can also view latency as a single histogram, which covers the entire time range that we're looking at. That's configured up here in the top right. So this is showing the last day histogram. You can also choose some of these other latency metrics as well and get a trend line for P50, P90 fetch latencies. We've also included an errors tab, which allows further diagnosis of error trends. Errors tab, not happening. Well, anyway, if I could click on the errors tab. Oh, there it goes. Yeah, this is a similar UX to the one we announced earlier this year, which is we called enhanced error diagnostics. And it allows us to see the error codes and also the query paths that are having issues. And you can use this to dive into operations and eventually traces that have those errors. And lastly, we've added a few more tools to help teams work more closely together. If we click on View Subgraph SDL, we can see that we've got the subgraph schema definition right there. This can be helpful if you need to review how the schema is working, how the domain is modeled, et cetera. And down at the bottom, you can see that we include a contact directive. And by adding this to your subgraph schema, you can provide a Slack channel or email address to connect back to the team that owns a subgraph service, and we'll be able to service that over here on the top of the Insights page. So in this case, product server team. That's the end of demo land. So I hope everyone's really excited to try this out. We think it's a powerful new tool to reveal patterns in subgraph traffic. We can now identify top traffic sources by client, by operation. We can see usage and performance metrics over time, see error breakdowns, and finally compare subgraphs and connectors using key health metrics to reach out to subgraph owners and use a contact. So to turn on Subgraph Insights, you'll just need to opt in via your router configuration. We have a flag that we describe here, telemetry.apollo.preview subgraph metrics. You'll notice the preview prefix. That's actually going to be removed in the very next version of router. But this is available as preview in 2.7. I think in 2.8 it will be officially GA. We are announcing it as GA this week. So just go ahead and get started. So who can use Subgraph Insights? All plan tiers have Subgraph Insights, at least some of them. The only difference is that the data retention varies depending on your plan. For the free tier, you've got 1 day of data retention. On the developer tier, it's up to 7 days. And standard and enterprise tiers, you've got 90 days. So the road ahead for Subgraph Insights. Coming soon will be a platform API, which supports the ability to pull Subgraph Insights into the tooling that you're building yourself. And this will add to the set of Insights APIs that we've started to release on the platform API this year. We're also planning some more enhancements for traces. We want to be able to look up traces for your subgraph, and we want to show the operations inside of traces that show you the bodies of the requests that are actually hitting your service. And we're also exploring more formal support for things like distributed tracing. And looking further into the future, we would really love to turn these metrics and traces into intelligent recommendations for improving your overall graph health and performance. We're exploring things like performance tuning suggestions, opportunities for using GraphOS features that might also benefit, servicing best practices, and improving your team's overall quality of life. So that concludes our feature announcements. We encourage you to go and try these features and help your teams on their Supergraph journey. Some things to remember: promote ownership of subgraphs to scale up, using subgraph keys for security and autonomy, optimizing subgraph health and performance, and helping spread the word about these new features. And ultimately, this is about working together and getting things done. We see time and again how unlocking these ownership models can directly impact the bottom line. And if there's one thing I want you guys to walk away with today, it's this: federation enables ownership, and ownership drives impact. All right, we got a few links up here where you can go and learn more about these features. And we've got some time up our sleeve here, so I think we can open the floor for any additional Q&A.
Yes. OK, so we will have 2 mics going around the room for questions with Tim. So let's go ahead and raise your hands. We'll move the mics around as quickly as. So one here will go first, and then on the left will go next.
Hey, hi. This is an awesome feature, by the way. Thank you very much. The quick question I have is, will this subgraph also at some point have, let's say people use requires directive, right? Now, in these cases, how would I know how many other subgraphs are using that directive to call or fetch data from me? Will that be something which will be available in some form from this?
Yeah, all of the fetches that are either explicitly requested through the API or implicitly requested, I guess, through, like you're saying, through federation dependency. Yeah, that should all be tracked. Yeah.
Would they be shown as a requires? Like
there's nothing that shows
differentiates
that
between, because it's from a route
versus implicit. Yeah.
Okay.
But that's a great idea.
Hi. How do we get notified about the subgraph API keys expiring? Do I have to log in every time?
Yeah, at the moment, you'll have to just set yourself a schedule and remember to come back and change it within 12 months. But the idea, from what I was told, the idea is that inside of the next 12 months, there will be custom expirations and some of these other management workflows that are going to be delivered. So you have 12 months up. We all have 12 months up our sleeves to make this story better. Yeah.
Especially a notification, right? Because I don't want to log in every day or
No, that would, yeah, I
every
understand that.
You
You don't want to go to studio every day.
One other question. So as of now, we have a separate repository for every subgraph schema. We were published through the repository. Now, why do I need subgraph keys if I have a separate repository and separate GitHub repo to publish the schema?
Yeah. So
and the access to the repository is controlled by an AD group. So only people in that group, say in the team, access.
Yeah. So if you're using the schema registry from Apollo, you'll still need to be publishing that schema into GraphOS, right?
Right.
And the only way to do that without subgraph keys right now is through graph keys. And graph keys have the scope of the entire graph. So you won't be able to be sure that you can't affect some other team's schema. You could potentially be modifying something else. So that's why they're there.
Okay.
Yeah, so the question I have is going to sound kind of stupid, but just so I have backing. So when the tracing of subgraphs becomes available, I'm going to assume that means that subgraph tracing has to be turned on as well.
So at the moment, there's kind of 2 different protocols that we can imagine using for subgraph traces. One which we've built in the early days of federation, federated tracing v1, it's called. FTV1 we sometimes abbreviate it as, but it's a way to tunnel the trace data as part of the response from the subgraph back to the gateway or router. And so then router can actually take that information from the subgraph and forward it on to GraphOS without the subgraph even really needing to be a participant in that. You do have to opt into it on the subgraph, but the limitation of that model is that it really stops at the field resolver level. So if you wanted to get higher resolution, like what's happening at the database layer or some other downstream API call that is, so behind the field resolver, then you will need to step up to something like what we call distributed tracing, right? And so there's it's become pretty well standardized through OpenTelemetry how distributed tracing works. You have this idea of a context that gets propagated from each service in the chain. So even all the way back to the client can actually include like the initial context for a trace, and then that could include a client span to see what the client experience is, then router, then subgraph, database, whatever. So yeah, that does not exist in Studio today, but you can actually make that work in some of the third-party APMs using OpenTelemetry today.
And then a real quick second question. When it comes to the insights, we're exposing the keys so that teams can take ownership in publishing, I'm assuming checks and stuff as well. But what about if we want to restrict their view of insights?
Yeah, well, right now, the permissions model of Studio depends on the role that you give people. So there's a few different roles. You can have this concept of a viewer role or a contributor role. So you'll have to go through the docs to sort of identify which tiers have access to which parts of Studio.
What I'm referring to, though, is having access to the insights for their
for that subgraph.
not for the whole graph.
Right. Yeah. At the moment, it's not segmented at that level of granularity.
Okay.
So that's where we would need this idea of like a custom role that you create that has access to some subgraphs and maybe not others.
Okay.
Yeah. But yes, stay tuned.
Over there on the left.
Hey Tim, thanks for your presentation. So given that there will be multiple graph admins for a supergraph,
Yes.
so they can create multiple subgraph keys too.
Yes.
Wouldn't that defy the idea of like having separate subgraph keys?
So you're saying if multiple admins can create subgraph keys?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're saying you maybe don't trust all of the admins?
The problem which we face is like just with the keys itself, right? It can't be like there will be only one graph admin. And when it goes to the contributor, the features which they can see in the Apollo Studio itself, it's very limited, right? So most of them want to be a graph admin. Along with that, there comes the responsibility too, right?
Yes.
I mean, the recommendation as per the Apollo docs is like for each of the teams, you identify one graph admin,
Yes.
and he can actually create the keys for the other team members, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So in this case,
Yeah.
so when we create the subgraph keys, it shouldn't be like, just one key.
Yeah, I think maybe there's the one point I might make here is I've been trying to emphasize that these are really great for deployment pipelines and CI/CD tooling, and perhaps not the best idea to give them to an individual user and use that, like have them treat that as their personal key. So so the idea would be like an admin will create a subgraph key for your team. You install that in your pipeline, and you don't have to worry about it for a while, at least till it expires. Yeah. And so that isolates the deployment aspect. But yeah, the Studio aspect would require more custom roles and those types of things. Yeah. So I feel like we've solved part of the problem, but not all of the problem just yet.
I understand.
Yeah.
I mean, we do the same thing. Like we have a separate key just for the CI/CD pipeline, but that one has access to all the variants.
Right.
Right. We have been asking Apollo for quite some time now. Like, can you limit the access for the variants itself? Right. Right now, if I create a Graph API key, it has access to all the variants. I want the limit. I mean, I want to give the privileges to the developers for the dev on the stage, but not the prod.
Right.
And it has to be like, limited to a set of people, maybe, right?
Yeah.
That is something which is not controlled as of now at all, right? Even with the introduction of the subgraph keys, it still remains open, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, so with subgraph keys, you do have the ability to scope it to variants, but if we're talking about other things besides subgraph keys, the only other tool in your belt is that protected variant concept. And it sounds like you might have already tried doing that, and it's still not quite what you need.
Yeah. So one last question. So any plans of implementing some kind of like RBAC in the studio too?
Yes, so that's the plan. Yeah, that ultimately will solve these problems. I think is to have the ability to create custom roles that have custom permissions, scoped to specific variants, specific subgraphs, all that should that should help solve many different types of workflows.
Thank you, Tim.
Hello, right here. There we are. How will the Subgraph Insights interact with like response caching and connectors?
Yeah, so I think that some of the other potential future work we could do here is adding more of these attributions to these subgraph fetch metrics, so that we could say segment them by whether they hit the cache or whether they were resolved from traditional response types. But I do like those ideas of like, how can we enrich this view a little bit more? What are those signals that would be helpful to people to get a better sense of what's working and what's not working, and make choices about what they should be doing in their graphs. So yeah, I'm happy to take suggestions on what other dimensions people would find useful.
Thank you for the talk. My question was related to the communication channel. Is there any plan to be able to set like alert level communications? So if a subgraph is erroring at a particular rate, communicate to some channel. Right now we have that set up in New Relic with just the router level error rates and those sorts of things, but you obviously don't get granular insight into whether a particular subgraph is erroring at some rate.
Right.
And that can be masked by a whole bunch of other healthy traffic somewhere else in your supergraph and router.
Mm-hmm.
And just telling the one particular team, hey, this subgraph that you own is erroring at 4% for an hour or something.
Right. Yeah. So the thing that I was showing there is somewhat of a human-to-human contact capability, not so much automated in terms of alerting or notifications. So I think, at the moment you'd have to probably work with that in your alerting tools to sort of identify levels of service or urgency according to the graph. I have heard of some people building a custom directive to annotate their schemas, where some parts of their schema are tier 0, some are lower tiers. So tier 0, if something's wrong with a tier 0 part of your graph, then that wakes people up. But if it's not tier 0, then it's a sort of lower urgency page. Yeah.
Hi Tim, thanks for the session. I'm actually having a same question what the other gentleman asked, right? So we have supergraph key. Everyone has access to it.
Yes.
Now we are creating a subgraph key.
Yeah.
Will it be overriding the supergraph key, saying like this subgraph cannot be deployed by the supergraph key, or it can be deployed only by the subgraph key?
Override in what sense?
Like for example, like someone has access to the supergraph key, right?
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying is there's a possibility someone else is deploying maybe the subgraph changes maybe accidentally or whatever way, right? So now we are giving an option of creating a subgraph key, but there's already existing supergraph key.
Ah, right. So you'll have to find those and take them down for whoever is not supposed to be using
No,
them,
but that's already been used, right, by so
Yeah.
many other pipelines, right? So we cannot take it down.
Right.
So with this implementation, would we be able to secure that subgraph can be deployed only by the subgraph keys?
I guess what you're saying is someone who you don't trust. I think it's similar problem.
Not trust, like there's already existing, right? Like
Right.
it's already there in the pipeline, it's in the vault, right? And
Yeah.
everyone has access to that vault right now with the pipelines. So.
Yeah. So
Are the old keys still active?
Yeah, old key is still active.
Yes,
It's
the old
used
key
by
is-
others, and then new teams who are creating the news. Whenever we implement this, right, in newer version, right?
yes.
If we are creating subgraph keys, right?
Mhm.
Ideally, we should not be allowing the subgraph to be deployed by the supergraph key.
That's true. Yes. Well, subgraphs can deploy their subgraph, which will result in a change to the supergraph ultimately.
Right, but
Yeah.
can we still use the supergraph key to deploy the same subgraph which has a subgraph key?
Well, yeah, if you've got existing keys, then
Yes.
yes, they're still. So yeah, potentially that would be a request to depermission existing keys, or
Okay.
to lower the permissions of existing keys that
Okay.
you've got in your environment already. That seems useful.
Okay, and second question was on tracing, right? So would you be accepting the trace parent and log that, and eventually, because today we don't see a lot of router logins, right? Like we are still on the very old version of router.
Sorry, which version of router are you in?
We are like very old, 1047.
Yes. Okay. So in the 1.x line of router, the traces that were there were still what mentioned the FTV1 style traces, which only give you that field level resolution. From router 2.x, by default, we're using OpenTelemetry traces, which have a higher resolution. And those, at the very least, they support seeing some of the things inside of the router. So you can actually see like the query planning spans and some of those other things that are the internal machinery of the router execution path. But yes, and still TBD is fully distributed tracing, which would have scope further down the path. Yeah.
All right, we've got time for probably one or two more questions. Any? Yep. Okay.
Great talk. Quick question. I might have missed it if you said something about this. It was the subgraph keys. Does the interface allow you to see when they were last used?
I think it does have
so
that,
if
doesn't
you're trying to,
it? I can't remember.
If you're trying to remove, you're ready to delete one or depermission one, you want to make sure it's not being used.
Yeah, well, I think that possibly that's something that's in the API, but not in that command line output that we showed you. I didn't see it last modified or anything in there, so but something to check. I'm not sure.
That's something just with the regular API keys that don't exist today, I don't think. And so that's been a kind of problem with us is we're afraid to remove keys because we're afraid what we might break.
Not sure if it's stale or not.
Yeah, so that would be an ask. If that isn't there, we'd love to see that.
Yeah, I have a feeling that it's there in the admin view for the list of keys, that there's some kind of last used field now, but in Studio UI. And maybe when we go to build the Studio UI version of subgraph keys, we can
take a look.
Slot that in.
Yeah. And then with the new insights, you have to enable it in the router. Any sense of how much increased work is having to be done by router to produce those? Yeah,
so that's actually an interesting question. There is, we've done some benchmarking. So it would be a small amount of overhead to have a little bit more of these metrics being exported, right? But there's a bunch of these limits that are set inside of the OpenTelemetry pipeline that actually prevent us from hitting very extensive memory explosions and CPU explosions. So there's some great tools inside of the OpenTelemetry pipeline that enforce some level of confidence that we've done some pretty extensive benchmarking on this before we were comfortable saying it's GA, because we were still a little bit on the fence until all those numbers came back and we felt good about it. So
So quick one, it's there. Yeah. So what's the sampling rate on these, and is it configurable, to get for the Subgraph Insights? And the second one follow-up was, you mentioned that there would be an API or some form for building tooling around it. What's the timeline approximately around that?
Yeah, I might pass that off to our manager here. So the sampling rate, you can configure it. Yeah, so there's some configurations in the router YAML, which we're actually expanding those configurations. And so even in router 2.7 that we talked about, there are some enhancements to the Apollo side of the telemetry configuration. So that allows you to actually configure, say, the tracing pathway differently than the metrics pathway, which before everything was kind of rolled into one and it wasn't clear what was happening. But now it's a lot more clear what's happening. And by default, it's a 5-second export schedule, which you can lower if you have the need to do that, or expand it if you want to send them less frequently. And timeline, I'm not sure we want to say what the timeline for Subgraph Insights platform API. Yeah.
So since the alerting and all, we have to rely on the router to build alerting. Right. I can just you soon.
Yeah, so the question was, what is the timeline for being able to get Subgraph Insights in the platform API? And the answer is we're working on it and ... soon. Yeah, so I think, yeah, it feels like the not too distant future.
Yes.
Yeah.